Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Eddie Jennings from EJSLLC.com. This video is going to expand on some viewer feedback that I received. And before I dive in, I want to thank returning subscribers for watching another video, as well as invite anyone who's watching who hasn't subscribed yet to click that subscribe button and ring the bell when you do, so you can be aware of when new content comes available. And lastly, if you enjoy the video, make sure you click like, share it with others that might find it useful, and feel free to leave some comments yourself. So Rob wrote in via EJSLLC.com asking for some pointers about making a RHCSA lab environment on Windows 10 Pro. So I emailed him back some pointers, and I got to thinking that maybe it would be worthwhile to make a video that pretty much shows you from step 0 to have a functioning lab how to do this on Windows 10 Pro. Because there are some of you out there, as you're working toward your RHCSA exam, you might not have like a separate dedicated machine that you can use for your lab. You might just have your one particular machine. And in this case, if that machine happens to be a Windows 10 Pro device, then the steps that I'm going to show you will take you from having nothing to a functional RHCSA lab. I do stress Windows 10 Pro with this because the solution I'm going to show you is going to involve using Hyper-V, which is going to be available for Windows 10 Pro, but to the best of my knowledge, it's not available for just plain Windows 10. For just Windows 10, you might want to use something such as VirtualBox for your hypervisor for your VMs, and then the concepts that are in this video would apply to that. You would just be using a different hypervisor. One other thing to think about is when you're doing virtualization, you need to have enough resources on your actual computer to be able to handle the VMs. Generally, this is only an issue with storage and RAM. Most modern CPUs are going to be able to handle virtualization pretty easily. The VMs that I'm going to have you configure as a part of this tutorial are going to require 2 gigabytes for one and then 1 gigabyte each for the other 2 VMs. You can probably do this with, or you can probably configure the VMs with a little bit less RAM. You might want to experiment if you're on a machine that is limited in RAM, but just remember when you're working with virtualization, the host itself, in this case your Windows 10 operating system and your other applications that are running, need to have memory to function as well as your VMs. So without further ado, we're going to jump into creating an RHCSA lab in a Windows 10 Pro environment using Hyper-V. So the process of installing Hyper-V on Windows 10 Pro is actually quite simple. What we're going to do is go to our Start menu. We're going to open the Control panel. Way back when, you could right-click the Start menu to get to that. And we're going to go to Programs and Features. And then we're going to turn Windows features on or off. And if your account is not an administrator account, then you'll probably be prompted for the UAC window for that. What we're going to do is just check Hyper-V. Now you can drill down into Hyper-V, and there are a couple of things from which you can choose. I would recommend just getting it all. Like, there's no sense in installing the platform aspect of Hyper-V and not the management tools. So go ahead and get everything that you need and click OK. It'll talk about searching for required files, and this generally doesn't take too long. However, you are going to be prompted to reboot. So once we reboot here, I'm going to pause the video, and when my connection is back, then we will continue. So after your reboot, you can confirm that Hyper-V has been installed and all the management tools by going to your Start menu and going under Windows Administrative Tools, and you will find your Hyper-V Manager. So if we click and open that, it'll bring up our Hyper-V Manager, and you'll see your host. Mine is named Nariac, and you probably saw some of the EverQuest icons and such on my desktop. So if you're familiar with that game, then you should understand what Nariac means there. Now, from here, we're going to do one configuration and then grab the tools that we need to be able to make our RHEL VMs, and then come back to the Hyper-V Manager. But the first thing I want to do is set up networking. So the way Hyper-V is going to work is we're going to create a virtual switch, and this virtual switch is going to allow our VMs to send traffic over whatever physical NICs that we have on our host or our network interface cards. Now, there is a default switch for client-side Hyper-V on Windows 10 Pro. I typically don't use that because I want to have a little bit more control over the addressing of computers, and you can still do static IP addresses and such with a default switch. But what little I've used of the default switch, I have found sometimes the entire network address space will change upon reboot of your actual Windows 10 device. And for what we're going to want, we want to keep a consistent IP subnet and such that we're going to use. So what we're going to do for new virtual network switch, we're going to choose type external. We're going to click create virtual switch. We'll give it a name, and I'll just name it RHEL Lab. Then the connection type, you want it to be an external network because, again, we are wanting to interface with the outside world, and we want the traffic to go over our physical network interface card on our computer. Now, if you have more than one NIC, such as I have a wireless NIC on this Windows computer as well as my wired connection, you can pick whichever NIC that you want to use. If you have a single NIC, you want to make sure that you have Allow Management Operating System to share this network adapter checked. Now, I use my wired NIC as my main NIC, so that's why I'm keeping it checked here. If you choose not to check this, then the actual Windows installation is not going to be able to use the network card in addition to your VM. Basically, what's going to happen is a bridge is going to be created by Windows, so that way that physical network card can serve both the host as well as your VMs. Now, when you click apply, you're going to lose network connectivity for just a moment. It'll be pretty brief. And so I'm actually remoted into this Windows computer from my Fedora laptop. And so depending on how long this interruption is, I might pause the video, but we'll go ahead and click apply now. And of course, it will warn us about the pending network disruption. All right, so after a moment, the network connection is reestablished, or at least reestablished from our RDP session, and we'll click OK, and we have our virtual switch. You can verify that by clicking the Virtual Switch Manager, and you'll see that the RHEL Lab switch is now available. So before we start making our VMs, what we're going to need is to get the ISO file for Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Now, you can use CentOS if you want. You can also use Oracle Linux because they are binary compatible with RHEL. However, since Red Hat has the free developer program that allows you access to actual RHEL for up to, I think, 16 instances, and you can use that for production stuff as well, I would say if you are preparing for the RHCSA exam, it's best to use the actual tool that you will be using on the exam, which is going to be Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So to be able to get to that, we're going to open a web browser. We're going to head to redhat.com. And once we're here at redhat.com, we're going to click Developers. Now, this click path is accurate as of June 3rd, 2021. It might change by the time you're watching this video, but the basic concepts are going to be the same. And from this page, you actually would be able to click Products and go ahead and download Red Hat Enterprise Linux. However, you're going to need a subscription to be able to access the Red Hat repositories, which you're going to need to be able to get various packages and such. So we're going to scroll down to the bottom, or maybe all the way down. Let's see. Yep, there it is. And we want to click the Join Red Hat Developer. So when you click that, you will be brought to a form which you'll need to fill out. You'll create a login. You'll feed it an email address. You'll talk about what your current job role is. You'll make a password. Now, I will say that I have not received any emails from Red Hat that are sales emails saying, hey, why don't you buy actual subscriptions for RHEL and such. I do get some of their event emails, but those are things that I actually opted into. So don't worry about making the developer subscription and think that you're going to be inundated with sales. Now, that might change in the future. I doubt it, though. I've been part of this for almost a year now, and I really haven't got any sales emails at all. So once you've done that, you'll click Create Your Account. If I recall correctly, it's going to send you an email that you have to click the link to verify who you are and such. And so once you're done with that, you'll go back to redhat.com. And you can log in if you want. Otherwise, you can click Developers, click Products, and Red Hat Enterprise Linux is usually going to be a featured download, but if for some reason it is not, you can find it in the Browse Product by Name. But we'll click Red Hat Enterprise Linux. We'll click download. And the version that you want is the DVD ISO for x86-64. Now I'm not going to download this. I already have prior to making the video, but at this point you would click download and then you would save your ISO file. So now that you have your ISO downloaded, we are ready to create our VMs. And just to show you, I'm going to open my File Explorer here. And I have a folder that is C ISOs, and you can see my RHEL 8.4 ISO is ready to go. So we're going to close our browser and we're back at the Hyper-V Manager. Now what we're going to do is actually create 3 VMs at once, and I'm doing this simultaneously mainly because it'll save a little bit of time for you. You don't need to wait for one VM to be done before you move on to the next one, and I want to give a little explanation as to why we're doing 3 VMs. In my lab environment, I like to have a VM that's kind of like my control VM, and it's from this VM, which would be, my workstation if I were in a production environment. I will control whatever servers and such that I need to control. I usually do that for my RHEL lab environment as well. You don't necessarily have to do this. You can just use a single RHEL server VM to do everything. But when I'm doing lab stuff, I try to kind of mimic what I think real life would be like. And so you can do all 3 of these VMs if you want to follow exactly, how I set up my lab. Otherwise, you can just do one. So to make a VM, we're going to click New, and then click Virtual Machine. Then on the wizard, we're going to click Next, and we're going to give the virtual machine a name, which we'll call this RHEL WS for Workstation. We'll click Next. Specify generation, use Gen 2. There's no reason to use Gen 1 VMs anymore for Hyper-V unless there is some technical limitation that absolutely requires it. Click Next. For assigning memory, we're going to uncheck dynamic memory. I want to give the VM pretty much all the memory that I intend for the VM to have. And for this, I'm actually going to do 2 gigs, which maybe is a little low for a workstation, but again, we're not going to be doing anything ridiculous with it. And you might be in a situation where you don't have a ton of RAM on your system. And so we want to try to be as conservative as we can with that. For networking, we're going to choose the RHEL Lab. And then for hard disk, we're going to create a virtual disk. Usually by default, Hyper-V is going to name that virtual disk, the VHDX file, after your VM name. And we're going to make this, actually I'm just going to do 20 gigabytes because there's some stuff that we're not going to install that we don't need. Now your location might be different than mine. I have mine configured to keep VMs keep the virtual disks in a folder on my C drive. Whatever default location you have is perfectly fine with this. And then installation options, we're going to choose install an operating system from bootable image file. And again, your default location might be different than mine, and that's perfectly fine. We'll click browse, and you'll browse to whatever location you saved that RHEL ISO from. Click open. We'll click next. It'll show you a summary, make sure everything looks right, and then we click finish. Now we're not going to power this on just yet. We're going to go ahead and prepare our 2 other VMs as well. One thing you do need to do for each VM is right click that VM and go into settings, and we're going to disable secure boot. Otherwise you're going to have a hard time getting this VM to boot for you to be able to install the operating system. So we'll go ahead and make our 2 server VMs as well. Again, you don't have to make 2 server VMs. I like having 2 just in case I want to do some type of objective where 2 servers need to talk to one another. You can go ahead and have that available. So we'll call this RHEL server. We'll just do SVR for server. I'm going to do 01. Again, Gen 2. For this, I'm actually only going to keep 1 gig of memory because the servers we're not going to install any type of desktop environment, so that should be sufficient for us. It might make the installer be a little slow, but once we get past that, we'll be fine. Again, we're going to choose RHEL Lab as the network connection. And this, I'm going to do 20 gigabytes as well for its hard drive. And again, we're going to specify our ISO file. We'll We'll go into settings and turn off secure boot. We'll do it one more time for our second server. Capitalization really doesn't matter, but I try to keep things consistent when I can. So RHEL Lab, again, 20 gigabytes for the hard drive. You may be able to do less. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly how much storage is needed for just a real basic install. And once it finishes creating this disk, it might take just a moment. I realized the error. I did not change the name of the server, so let me move back. Probably you watching this video are going, yep, you're going to have an error, Eddie. There we go. This should work now. Kind of nice that Hyper-V checks against that, so that way it won't overwrite a VM that you've already made. And again, we'll need to disable secure boot. So at this point, the quote-unquote hardware of our virtual machine is ready to go. So now it's time to install the operating system. So we'll start with the workstation because that's going to probably take the longest. So we'll double-click. That will open a console window to your virtual machine, and then we'll click Start. Now, if you want, you can do the test your media and before you install RHEL. And if you do, this will just add a little bit to the install process, and it'll make sure that the media checks out, and then it'll do the installation. I've already done this, so I'm going to go ahead and do the install RHEL or Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8. So while that's thinking, we're going to do the same thing for our server VMs. Double click server 1 and install. And double click the second server, which should bring up a console window. There it is. Start that and install. Now, if you're not comfortable juggling 3 VMs at once, that's perfectly fine. I'm just doing it to save a little bit of time and keep you from having a video that will last forever. So once the initial boot process starts, you'll go into the Anaconda installer. And so here we're on the workstation. We're going to work with it first. We'll click continue, or if English is not your primary language or you want English that has a different localization to it, you can choose that there. And you can see in the background the other 2 VMs are getting to their desired state. So at this point in the installation, if you want to change, your language support and keyboard and all that, you can do that. We're actually going to go over to the system column first. For installation destination, we'll click that. We're going to keep the default. So just click done. And then for network, we're going to turn on our network because it is off by default. And for the workstation, we're just going to keep that at DHCP. Also, I like to change the host name to match the name of my VM. So this will be RHEL WS. I'll click apply for that. Now, once you have networking configured, then we can go into the software section, which technically you don't have to have that, but for what we're going to do, you need it. Now, we're going to go ahead and connect to our Red Hat subscription. We're not going to do this on the server VMs. I'm going to show you how to do that via the command line. But for the workstation VM, if you want to go ahead and get everything set for your installation, or rather set for your subscription and the repos and such during installation, you'll do this. So we're going to click Connect to Red Hat. You can either use your account credentials, or you can go into your Red Hat subscription and create an activation key instead. I'm just going to use my credentials here. See if I can remember it. And we'll click Register. After just a moment, it'll tell you it's attaching the subscription. And then once that's successful, you'll see the following page. And if you see my start and end dates in July, I discovered the Red Hat developer program shortly before I took my RHCSA last year in August. So there you see my start and end date. From what I have gathered, you can renew this indefinitely, and it's free to renew, but you do have to go through like a little renewal hoop when your end date comes. So we'll click Done. And you'll notice the installation source changed to Red Hat Content Delivery Network, because what this installation is going to do, and why it's going to take a little longer than the server installations, is it's going to reach out to Red Hat and pull down the most recent packages of everything. So when this is done, everything should already be up to date. So we're going to click Software Selection. And for this, we're going to choose Workstation. If you want, you can install some of these extra things. I would not, just because you're really not going to need them for your lab work. This is already going to come with probably more stuff than we actually need, but I do like trying to do the Workstation. If you want to do server with GUI instead, that's perfectly fine as well. But for this tutorial, I'm going to do Workstation. So we'll click Done. And then for user settings, I usually make my own administrative user and then sudo into root. If you want to just create a root password, that's perfectly fine too. So I'm going to make this an administrator, feed it a password and click Done. And then we'll click Begin Installation. And so this is going to do all of the installation tasks, creating your file systems and such. It's going to reach out to Red Hat and get packages. And so while that's working, we're going to go to our two server VMs. So we have server 1 here. I'm actually going to move it to the middle and put server 2 here on the side. And this process is going to be very similar to what we just did for the Workstation. Start by clicking Continue. Now, mind you, remember these VMs we only gave 1 gig of RAM to, so stuff's going to be a little bit slower, but once we actually have the VMs functioning and we're no longer using the GUI, that's not going to be an issue. So just like with the Workstation, we're going to start with the system, and we'll click Done to keep the defaults. We're going to go ahead and configure networking here, and for this, we'll change the method to manual. We're going to add an IP address. Now, this is going to need to be on the same subnet as your normal network, because remember, we're sharing this network interface card, and the VMs are going to talk to each other via it. There's more to it than that, but for what you need to know, that's what's going to happen. And especially since we kept the Workstation on DHCP, we want to be on the same network. Now, I happen to know the range for my for the DHCP service on my network, so my static settings are going to be outside of that range, so there's no conflict of address. So we're going to do 192.168.1.60. Net mask, you can either do whatever the number of bits are in the net mask, or the actual 255.255.255.0 or whatever net mask that you need. Gateway, we'll put in the default gateway. And then DNS servers, we'll put in our DNS server, because we're going to want this to be able to have name resolution. So we'll click Save, and then we will turn on the network interface. We'll also set the host name, RHEL SVR01. Click Apply and click Done. Now this time we're not going to connect to Red Hat here. I'm going to show you how to do that over the command line. So our installation source does not change to Red Hat Content Delivery Network. It's going to stay the local media, which is your ISO file. And for software selection, I'm going to choose minimal install. And the reason I do this is this will not install some packages that you're going to need to install to be able to do some of the RHCSA objectives. In particular, I'm thinking about VDO. I'm fairly certain the minimal install will not install what you need for that. So as you're working on the objectives and such, this will give you some practice for actually installing packages, which happens to be one of the objectives for the exam, being able to install packages with a package manager. If you choose server and server with GUI, there will be a lot of these packages that come pre-installed. Now, is it a problem to use these two options? No, but just my recommendation for your lab, you want to use that minimal install so you're doing more things and getting more practice. As far as the exam itself, I don't know whether or not you'll get a minimal install or server or some combination, right? So therefore, if you practice with the minimal install and you get to your exam and there's packages you need to do the objectives and they're not there, you'll know how to get them. So we'll click Done, and we'll go ahead and create our admin user, make it an administrator. And what this make user administrator does is it's going to put this into the wheel group. That way you have sudo privileges and such. So we'll click Create. Everything looks good, and begin installation. Let's check on the workstation, see how it's doing. Yep, it's about a quarter of the way done. You're going to find the installation for the server is probably going to go a little bit quicker because there aren't going to be nearly as many packages that are downloaded. Then we'll do the same thing for server number 2. I'm just going to go through this quickly, since the steps will be the exact same as for server 01. Your storage, do the network. I'm setting a static IP address. Now, of course, you could do this, after the fact by going and getting it done during the initial install of the operating system. Save, activate the interface, do our host name. Again, we're not going to connect to Red Hat at this time. We're going to change to minimal install, set our administrator account, and begin installation. So once these get to the state where it's time to reboot, we'll return, but we're going to pause for right now. That way you're not having to sit and just watch status bars scroll for several minutes. All right, so at long last, it's time to reboot each of our VMs. So we'll click Reboot System. We'll do that for the workstation, server 1, as well as server 2. And the reboot will take just a moment. Once the reboot's complete on the servers, you'll be greeted with a login screen, and then for the workstation, you're going to be greeted with needing to accept the license, which you will click that and click Done. If you did not attach the subscription to your installation, you can do this now, but we've already done that, so we're going to click Finish Configuration. And after a moment, you'll be greeted with the Red Hat login screen. So we're going to go ahead and log in to our administrator account. And when you log in the first time, you're going to be greeted with a little tour of the GNOME desktop environment, as well as a little help thing from GNOME. So we're going to click through this and then close the help. And we have a couple of more configuration things to do, and then we'll be pretty much done with the workstation. So the first thing I want to do is open the terminal, and we're going to make sure that there's no patches, which there shouldn't be because we use the Content Delivery Network to do the installation, but never hurts to check. So we'll do sudo, if I can spell that right, DNF. You can also use yum, but we're in RHEL 8, so it's time to start using DNF. Upgrade, and we're going to do -y because we're going to upgrade regardless of what's available. You'll see that it's looking through 2 repositories, the AppStream and the base OS. And it should come back with nothing. But famous last words in IT, should, right? All right, so as expected, there's nothing to patch. Notice these 2 repositories. That'll be significant in just a moment or so. The last thing we're going to do is edit our etc host file to be able to have name resolution for our 2 servers that we would be connecting to. So we're going to do vi, and actually we're going to do sudo vi because we need to have root privileges to be able to actually edit the file, or to be able to save edit for the file. And so we're going to move down. You can either press the I key to go to insert mode, or press the O key to go to insert mode and move down a line. We're going to add our first server, so 192.168.1.60. We'll tab over, and that'll be RHEL SVR01. We'll do the same or similar for RHEL SVR02, and you can either press the escape key to go back to your command mode for VI, and then you can either do :X, which is what I like doing, or :WQ for write and quit. So at this point, we should be able to ping our servers from our workstation. So let's try that. Yep, we'll do Control-C to stop the ping, and RHEL SVR02. Excellent. Next, what we want to do is do our SSH connection, so that way that we already get past the point of needing to say yes to the question about do you trust the SSH key, which eventually when we start doing snapshots and such, you're going to want to have that already done. So we'll do SSH, Eddie, if I can spell that right, admin at the name of our server. RHEL SVR01. Say yes, we do trust this. Feed it the password. And now we are actually in our server. I'm going to double click this and maximize that. So we're in RHEL SVR01. So if I were to do sudo dnf repo list, which you don't necessarily have to do sudo for this, but for whatever reason RHEL will complain if you don't. It'll still give you the data that you want, but it'll still complain. You see that we have unable to read consumer identity, system has not been registered. You have to use subscription manager to register. No repos available. So remember, for the workstation, we did this as a part of the OS install process, but we did not do that for the servers. So I'm going to clear my screen and we're going to register this with Red Hat. So we'll do sudo subscription -manager register. And it'll ask for our username and our password. And if you did your password correctly, after just a moment or so, it'll tell you that the system has been registered. And there's one other step. We actually need to attach the subscription. Now, there may be a way to do that all in one command. If there is, I don't know it off the top of my head. Feel free to leave a comment if you know the all-in-one command for it. We'll do sudo again, subscription manager attach, and this one usually takes a little bit longer, but in just a moment it will have our subscription attached and all will be good. And if we were to do that sudo dnf repo list again, then we're going to see those same two repositories that we saw for just our workstation, the app stream and the base OS. I'm actually going to exit the SSH session now because we're actually going to do the next step in the console. I want to go ahead and SSH into the second host. Go ahead and get that fingerprint out of the way. And while we're here, we'll go ahead and take care of the subscription as well. Spell that correctly. I have a feeling I fat fingered that, but we'll see what happens. Well, it looks like I did it correctly. And we'll do the subscription attachment. And again, after a couple of minutes, we'll see that we have subscribed. And if we were to do the repo list again, as with the other server, that the AppStream and base OS repos are available to us. There are other repos that you can get access to as well, but those are the two that we're going to need for most of our stuff. So I'm going to actually exit my session, close the terminal here, and we're going to move over to our two servers. So I'm going to log in on the console. And if you remember, these servers, we did not choose the Red Hat Content Delivery Network because we did not subscribe or configure our subscription at the time of installation. So we are going to need to patch these. So sudo dnf upgrade -y, and we'll do the same for the second server. After a couple of moments, that will finish, and we're actually going to reboot the servers. Shutdown -r now. Actually, we'll need to use sudo for that. We'll do the same for the second server. Notice that it has grabbed a new kernel. All right, so we're going to log in once again, and we're going to check for patches one more time. You might think that odd, but if you come from the Windows world of system administration, oftentimes you'll do your Windows updates, you'll reboot, and then if you check updates, you'll find that there's more stuff to get. Figured that wouldn't be the case here, but it never hurts to look. We're also going to edit the etc host file to where we can refer to each of these servers by their IP address as well. So sudo vi etc hosts. We're going to add a line for the other server, so 1.61, and we'll do the same for server 2. We'll first check for patches, which there shouldn't be any, and then we will edit the etc host file. We'll make sure that ping works. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and do an SSH session just to where, just like on the workstation, we'll have already said yes that we trust the key that's being used. I'm actually not going to complete the session. I just wanted to go ahead and trust the key. And we'll do the same on the other side. Pressing Control-C to quit the ping early. And we'll go ahead and trust the SSH key as well. or rather, not the SSH key, but the fingerprint of that particular server. But we won't complete the connection. Now what we're going to do is shut down the VMs. This step you don't necessarily have to do, but I like to do it because I have found that when we're working with some snapshots, and if we have a snapshot that's really old and you revert that snapshot, or checkpoints as they're known as in Hyper-V, sometimes NTP or Network Time Protocol has an issue. And I've found that when you just boot the server, then during the initial gathering of DHCP and all that kind of stuff, and the initializing of your NTP client, time issues tend to not be nearly as much of a thing. So again, you don't have to do this, but I've found it to be useful. So we'll sudo shutdown -h now. We'll do the same on the other server. We'll close these and go back to our Hyper-V manager. And if you notice, each server has an automatic checkpoint. This is a, I guess, quote, feature of Hyper-V on Windows 10 Pro. I don't particularly like it. I find it to be annoying. And if you find this to be annoying as well, there is a way to stop this. And you can go to Settings, and there should be a way, to uncheck automatic checkpoints. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do this. So we're going to delete this checkpoint. So there's really, and it's going to merge that. We're going to do the same thing on the other server. So we'll right click the checkpoint and click delete checkpoint. Yes, we are sure, and it'll merge it. And we're going to do the same thing on the workstation as well. Merge the checkpoint. This is going to take a little longer because it was a running VM. We're going to go into settings and go to checkpoints and uncheck automatic checkpoints. I guess the idea is to give you like a real quick thing that you can revert to, but maybe I'm just a curmudgeon as far as how I want Hyper-V to function, and I like getting checkpoints, when I explicitly say, yes, make a checkpoint, which is what we're about to do now. So for RHEL Server 1 and for RHEL Server 2, both of these are in a state where this is kind of the base configuration. We've patched it, we've configured the host file, we've trusted the little fingerprint between the two servers when doing an SSH connection. So we're going to right click and click checkpoint. And once that checkpoint's made, I usually rename it to something like this. Initial config, and I give it the date. Of course, you can name it to whatever you would like, or just keep the default name that's there. And we'll do this for server 2 as well. You can do a checkpoint for your workstation if you like, but most of the changes that you'll be doing are going to be on the server VMs. All right, so now that those checkpoints are made, we're going to start the VMs, and I'm going to show you the power of doing these checkpoints. One of the things that you will do with your training for RHCSA are just tasks over and over again until you become familiar with them. Some of the tasks when you're doing your training you might have already been doing before, so you don't have to practice them as much. Others, such as for me when I got to the storage objectives, and I had never touched Stratus, I'd never touched VDO, I'd done a little bit with NFS, I'd done some stuff with LVM as well, but those are things that I needed to just do over and over again. And it was so nice to make various changes and or break things on the servers. And then if I couldn't figure out how to fix whatever was broken, or I just want to go back to a fresh start and then rehearse doing the steps again, such as needing to know what packages to get for Stratus or for VDO, you simply do the checkpoint. And so if you're not familiar with that, let me show you the power of what we have here. So I'm going to go back to our workstation VM. And I'm going to SSH into one of our servers. And so we're in the home directory, and I'm just going to touch a test file. All right, so we have a test file in the home directory. So let's say that this is something that you wanted to practice, SSHing into the server and touching a new file. Now, of course, we could just delete the file and do it again, but to show you how the snapshot would work, or the checkpoint would work, we're actually going to go back to our server 1. We're going to right click the snapshot, and then we're going to click apply. Now it's going to ask you if you want to create a checkpoint and apply. I would not do this. I would simply just apply the snapshot. And notice that this changed the state to off because when we took the snapshot, the VM was in the off state. We'll start the VM. Something that you will find might happen is your little terminal window may freeze. It might not close that connection cleanly. So if that happens, you can either start you another tab, which I'm going to do, or you can simply close the terminal window. So the VM should be up by now. So we'll SSH into it again. We'll confirm that we're in the home directory and ls-l, and you see that there is no file there because we went back to that state of the checkpoint, which was the initial configuration. The last thing I want to tell you about is as your checkpoint gets a bit old, what you might find is that DNF and Yum might stop working for you as far as being able to download and install packages and such, or update packages. And that is something to do with Subscription Manager. I can't tell you exactly what's happening with it, but I do know when I've been working in my Ansible lab for the RHCE exam, after a couple days of my checkpoint, what I'll need to do once I apply the checkpoint and then restart my VM is to run the Subscription Manager refresh command, or sudo Subscription Manager refresh. And what this does is reestablish your connection to RHEL, and then after that everything tends to work fine with DNF and Yum. So if you're working with your lab and you've are still using your original snapshot and you've been doing stuff for a few days and you revert back to it, just know that you might need to do that Subscription Manager refresh to solve some of the mysterious Yum or DNF woes that you have. So at this point, you have a functioning lab for your RHCSA practice, and you have that on a Windows 10 device, and you have no other computer that you're needing to use. You're able to do this completely within the Windows 10 device. So I hope that you found this useful. If you did, make sure that you click like on the video and also share it with others. Anyone that's working toward the RHCSA and is in a Windows environment, this can help them get their lab set up to where they're able to do their studies and do their practice as well. I do want to thank returning subscribers for watching another video, as well as invite anyone who's watching and hasn't subscribed yet to click that subscribe button and ring the bell when you do, so you can be aware of when new content comes available. Also to everyone, thank you for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you the next time.